Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everyone. For those of you who are able to join us for our previous two sessions, thank you and welcome back. And for those of you who are not able to join us, no worries. We have some summary handouts. A colleague will be dropping them in the chat for you to access. And Edie will be doing a brief recap for us today as well. Today is our final session in our three-part masterclass series. In today's session, we will be discussing the science of performance ratings and sharing a new model for performance enablement. My name is Aaron Adams. I'm the VP of Professional Services here at Engagedly and a lifelong student of the employee experience. With me again for one final time is the talented Dr. Edie Goldberg. For those of you who do not know Edie, she is a leading industry expert in the field of performance enablement with over 25 years of specialized experience in human capital management and organizational development. She's a keynote speaker, author of The Inside Gig, and more. Edie, thank you for all your great content in the first two sessions, and welcome back.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here, and we're going to close strong with our third and final masterclass. And I'm excited to get into the content. It's very controversial.
In today's session, our goal is to break down the science of performance ratings and share a model that will help us rethink our approaches and refocus on performance enablement. As always, we're pleased to be together to be with so many HR practitioners that are on the cutting edge of performance management. So thank you for joining us. A reminder for attending today's session, we'll be providing you exclusive access to our unreleased research study and a complimentary demo consultation. You can expect to receive that report in the next week or so. And before we get started, just one logistical item. For collective sharing, go ahead and use the chat. And if you have specific questions, go ahead and use the Q&A. We're going to be providing you with polls to interact and engage throughout the discussion today. So please share your feedback. Also, you will be getting a PDF of the slides. And that's it. Edie, let's dive in.
Great. So let me just launch our presentation here. Aaron, you can see everything?
We're good.
Great. Wonderful. Well, welcome, everyone. And as Aaron said, and hopefully my slides are going to advance here. As Aaron said, we are going to give a little bit of a recap of what we have discussed the last two sessions so that you can see, if you hadn't joined us for the first two, a little bit of a context for what we discussed. So in session one, module one, we really talked about the importance of purpose in performance management and designing your process for your intended, like, why do we do performance management in our organization? And really making sure that you're designing from that perspective. And then we spent a great deal of time just talking about the changing nature of work and how that really demands us to rethink how we do performance management within organizations, because so many things have changed. So for example, our organizations have to be much more agile. Certainly the last 18 months have shown us that, but change was happening really quickly before that. So the idea of setting goals at the beginning of the year and then reviewing them at the end of the year, that doesn't really match the flow and the pace of most organizations today. So we need things that are faster and more dynamic. We have increased collaboration and teamwork going on in our organization. So that kind of begs the question of, should we be setting goals individually or as part of our team? Kind of put that out there as a food for thought. We talked about the importance of considering feedback sources other than just the manager because of how we work in this collaborative nature. And then we also talked about the dynamic change in skill sets happening within organizations, which really kind of put more of an emphasis and a need for development in our performance management systems. In module two, we really focused on goal setting and feedback. We shared research and practice about what's happening in that area. So with respect to goal setting, we talked a lot about alignment rather than cascading goals, because things are so dynamic. Cascading just takes a long time. And we talked about new, more flexible approaches to goal setting, things like OKRs and the FAST method of goal setting. You can learn all about that in our handouts if you missed that session. And then with respect to feedback, we shared a lot of research on the impact of feedback on performance and retention. We talked about some of the latest research, which is really, really influencing practice. That was the mindset research from Carol Dweck and the SCARF research from the Neuro Leadership Institute and David Rock. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today. We talked about the importance of not just feedback, but feed forward. And Marshall Goldsmith was kind of led us in that direction. Again, we talked about sources of feedback. So we talked about the use of 360 and crowdsourced feedback and performance management systems. And of course, the importance of development. And we shared some research about that really demonstrated companies that focus on development outperform other companies that don't. So that's what you missed. And now let's go on to kind of the heart, if you will, of module 3. And what we're going to focus on today is we're going to share some research around ratings and whether or not we should have ratings or not have ratings. We'll get into that controversial conversation. And we'll talk about the role of ratings and compensation. And then I'm going to share a new model that myself and my colleague, Alan Colquette, and I derived from research that we have recently done about what really makes an impact in performance management. So for those of you who were with us in the prior 2 modules, you know that I love to share research to inform our practice. And for those of you joining us for the first time, I'm going to be sharing some research that my colleague and I did in 2020, where we had a deep research study with about 130 really well-recognized organizations, small, large, global companies. And we're going to learn from that research, but also I'm going to bring in research from other people so that we have kind of a broad spectrum to really influence how we think about ratings in our organization. So for those of you who were with us last week, you'll remember that I asked which element of the performance management process is most responsible for engaging and motivating performance. And there was a really clear response from our participants that it was about feedback and coaching. And then we asked the other question, which is what part of the process is most responsible for disengaging and demotivating employees, if any? We gave them the option to say none. But clearly, as you can see in these results, over half of our participants said that the evaluation process, ratings, trying to differentiate performance, was the most responsible for disengaging and demotivating performance. Importantly, when we asked which elements of the process companies were least happy with, 38% of our participants said evaluation was absolutely the part that they were least happy with. There was more dissatisfaction with this element than with any other element in the process. And no doubt that's why a lot of you are here with us today. So when I think about the performance puzzle, I think that there are 2 pieces that really kind of make up that performance element. It's about what we accomplish, generally our goals, and how we go about accomplishing that, our competencies. So performance is really, for me, both of these aspects, because either one of them can kind of set the organization astray. Aaron, how do you view performance? Is this in line with what you view?
Yeah, I think in incorporating these 2 pieces together into performance and the performance evaluation is essential. A lot of times we talk about, like you said, the what an employee accomplishes. We generally think about what they've achieved or they're working on. So in the Engagely system, what we think of is how can we support things like we discussed previously, SMART goals, OKRs, or even key responsibilities. Additionally, Engagely provides the ability for both employees and managers to incorporate these goals into the evaluation process. So it's a nice interaction, right? Between the manager and the employee when we're doing these evaluations or having these discussions. They can evaluate on the relevant kind of what really easily and those accomplishments. And like you said, like the other piece, the how, incorporating that can be tied directly to the job or even some of those functional organizational competencies. Essentially, the behaviors can be pulled directly into the evaluation, saves them time. focuses them in on what's important from the how side. And the system does essentially a nice job of really tying behavioral models that you guys may have with organizations into that process too. So definitely aligns, Edie, those two pieces.
Great. So let's start off with a little bit of the research about why ratings are flawed. And there is a lot of research about why ratings are flawed. And this research spans a great deal of time from before I was in graduate school until recent days. So common rating errors, that's probably something most of us are very familiar with. Halo, recency, and leniency are three of the very, very common rating errors. Halo being, you love me for one particular reason. You think I'm really smart. You think I'm really fun. You like my communication style. And then that one factor kind of provides a halo on all the other ratings. So rather than rating me on each individual goal, each individual behavior, you let this kind of one overall likeness or opposite influence your ratings. The recency effect, kind of what you've done for me recently, plays a big role in how people get evaluated. And leniency and its counterpart, severity, some raters are just overly harsh or overly generous. My dissertation research was actually on expectations. And what we found there is if you violate somebody's expectations about your performance, you will get an extreme reaction to that rating. So if you were kind of going along and you were an average performer all along, and then all of a sudden you did really well right before the review process, you would actually get rated even higher than your performance would indicate, because the violation of that expectation really, really enhanced somebody's perspective of you. Also, if you were going along, you were kind of average, and then right before the performance rating, your performance dropped a little bit, you would actually get extremely punished for that violation of expectation, and you would get rated even lower than if your performance had continuously been at that level. And you can train managers to overcome all these kinds of common rating errors. And in fact, most organizations do, and it's a really, really important aspect to making your process legally defensible. So that's great. But then there's deliberate distortion. Managers distort ratings based on their own personal biases or their own goals and objectives. Maybe they want to keep you as an employee. Maybe they don't want to keep you as an employee. Maybe they're trying to get you some kind of compensation, so they're distorting your ratings. Ultimately, there's a lot of management judgment that goes into ratings. And in fact, 67% of the employees in our research said that management judgment was kind of a big part of that final rating. So you can see managers could have a lot of sway here, and there can be a lot of deliberate distortion. And the data shows, the research shows that there is a lot of deliberate distortion. In fact, most experts agree that ratings are more likely to reflect the biases and idiosyncrasies of managers that are making the ratings than the actual achievements of individual employees. So there you go. But here's another reason why ratings can be flawed. It's that factors other than performance actually impact the rating. I have some of the items on here, but let me share with you some of the data around this. We asked, how much do factors other than performance on goals or competencies play in a manager's final rating? So those other factors are things like prior performance, the need to make a performance distribution, not a big fan of that, but it happens, leadership potential, whether somebody's a retention risk or not, all of these, where I am in my pay band, all of these might kind of influence what kind of rating I get. Over 23% of employees in this survey say that other factors than performance have a moderate to significant impact on that final rating. And a full 60% when you add some, moderate, and significant, that's 60% say that factors other than performance have at least some impact on employee ratings. Now, I don't think it is wrong per se to use all those other factors when determining compensation. In fact, I think that's dead on. That's very right. However, we communicate the message that it is about an individual's performance and it is their performance rating. So that is actually the problem with how we approach this performance appraisal process. So why do we rate? Well, first off, in the United States and in Western Europe, most organizations operate as a meritocracy, and we want to distribute rewards based on people's performance and their contributions. While that's somewhat idealistic, the kind of how we come up with somebody's performance, it's complicated because often our performance isn't just the result of our own individual contributions. Today, we work a lot in teams. So what we actually achieve isn't necessarily just the result of my own individual performance. Also, as I shared, our ratings are flawed. So decisions about compensation that are based solely on manager ratings will also be flawed. So whether or not we're able to achieve this ideal around meritocracy is questionable. The second reason we rate is litigation. Companies are concerned that they want to have the evidence to support any kind of termination decision. But a couple of things about that. First off, the overall risk of actual litigation from termination is low. That's true. Second is that more often than not, the data that we have in our performance review doesn't support the need, our desire to terminate somebody. Managers are over nice and they don't kind of directly address. We sugarcoat things in our performance reviews. So often people end up in court and the data that they have on this person's performance, it doesn't tell a consistent story. They've been good, they've been good, they've been good. All of a sudden they get one bad rating and then they're terminated. And that's not good evidence. The other thing is that courts generally focus on due process, not the reliability or the validity of the rating. So that due process is more like, did the person get adequate notice? Was your judgment based on some kind of evidence? Did they get a fair hearing? Did they get a chance to improve their performance after they got feedback that there was a performance problem? So litigation, kind of questionable about how much ratings actually help us there. And then we have the belief that ratings motivate. There is considerable research, especially for relative ratings, that they do not drive or improve performance, and they may actually cause performance to suffer, especially in collaborative work organizations. So this idea that ratings motivate, the research isn't really there supporting that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But now I want to hear from you. Thank you, Erin, for launching our poll. Now, this question's a little bit biased on getting rid of ratings, but I'd like to know kind of where are you? Where is your organization with respect to getting rid of ratings? Have you done it? You have no formal ratings. Oh, that's kind of out of the gate going well. Are you considering it? Have you discussed it, but not really made a decision one way or another? Have you discussed it, but firmly decided to keep ratings? Have you not discussed it and not kind of planning on it? Or did you get rid of them and but you have re-implemented them? Now, as we're working on this poll, I will say that a lot of companies that have gotten rid of them and then re-implemented them it's often not been because they were a perceived failure per se, but often because there's a new chief HR officer or a new CEO who doesn't really agree with the process. So we might hear from the person who did get rid of them, but re-implemented them to understand if that was what was going on in your company. Okay, why don't we go ahead and share the results? Let's see, very interesting. Wow, I'm really surprised. This is a really, really innovative group. 24% of you have gotten rid of ratings. In my survey, only 21% of our participants got rid of ratings. In my research, the next group was, we discussed it, but decided to keep ratings. That was 33%. Here, that's only 19%. Here, 33% of you haven't discussed it and you haven't thought about it. So maybe this will help you think about that. Let's see. Jose said, we've discussed it and kept ratings, but see value in reducing the toil by removing ratings. You're scared about the change management. Go ahead, Erin.
Well, we had another question too. Laura, when you were going over earlier in one of the slides, you were talking about a list of factors other than performance that could impact the final ratings. Do you want to reshare that list of what do you think are the other factors other than performance that could impact a final rating of performance?
It might be where I am in my pay band. It could be that I'm perceived as a high potential, and so people want to give me a higher rating, that I have leadership potential. It could be, often it's compensation, kind of where am I in my compensation band. Maybe I want to keep you on my team, so I want to rate you lower so somebody else doesn't try and pluck you out of my team. Maybe I want to get rid of you. So I rate you really high so that somebody else might consider promoting you and getting you off my team. So there are a whole variety of reasons.
Thanks, Edie.
Sure. Okay, so let's take down that poll and we can move on. You shared those results, right? Okay, so I'm gonna stop. Okay, I'm gonna get that off my screen. So traditional performance processes are often so focused on accuracy of ratings that many companies believe that they're actually reducing manager bias by creating a really, really complex formula from which the final answer about our performance rating will be derived. So we weight goals. We determine that results are worth 60% and behaviors are worth 40%. And magically, we're going to have this really super accurate description of an employee's performance. But time and time again, when I run employee focus groups and I ask managers, how do you really get at your final performance rating? Do you follow that strict formula or do you do something else? I hear more stories about the fact that they start with what they want the employee to get from a bonus or a merit perspective, and then they actually work backwards to get the formula that will help them get the outcome that they want. So when we confound performance, a rating on performance, with our compensation system, and we hardwire them together, we find that managers simply manipulate the system to get the outcome that they want. So this very complex formula that we've created is really just for show, and people kind of manipulate the outcome to get to what they want. So there we go. So we're beginning to see a trend toward simplification of the rating process. And it turns out that all the precision that we built into the system is just being manipulated. So is all that effort really worth it? While weighting goals does provide a benefit of communicating to employees which goals are more important, relatively speaking, you can communicate that without actually weighting the goals. So simplification may take the form of eliminating weighting of goals, reducing the number of goals, reducing the number of ratings, or eliminating ratings altogether. Every company takes their own path towards that simplification, but I believe that making the process more authentic and straightforward is a trend that we're going to continue to see. Due to some research that suggests that performance isn't necessarily normally distributed, one path for simplification has been that rather than focusing so much energy on trying to differentiate the people kind of in the middle of your distribution. So if you have a 5 or a 7-point rating scale, on that 5-point rating scale, trying to differentiate your 2, your 3, your 4. Instead, companies are really simplifying either the rating scale or their communication so that they're really focused on identifying who are my top performers. Who are those people that are so low that we're going to consider removing them from the organization, and then communicating to everybody else that, you know, you're doing a good job. So these companies are focused on recognizing and rewarding exceptional performance, and then communicating to a majority of the employees that their work is deeply appreciated, and they'll continue to be paid fair relative to the market, with adjustments reflecting either an increase in their proficiency or a increased scope of their role, or simply just a cost of living increase. So that is kind of what simplification starts to look like. And there is still a lot of debate about whether or not you should rate or not rate, and whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. But in our study, we actually found that this tactic is really just noise in the system. Whether or not a company rated their employees or didn't rate their employees made no difference in whether or not those companies said that they achieved their intended outcomes with performance management. It's really about something much bigger. It's about feedback and coaching. Ratings don't add value in and of themselves. In fact, some of the research says that ratings actually hinder performance. But ratings help facilitate other HR processes like compensation or succession planning. It's my experience, and this has been echoed by other researchers, that companies that have eliminated ratings have done so more so to put the focus on the dialogue, the conversation, to focus more on coaching and feedback and less on evaluation per se. So they use the elimination of ratings as a signal that something has really changed in the process and we're putting the focus someplace else. Erin, how does Engagedly deal with the option of to rate or not to rate?
Tis the question, right? Because it's using ratings is a debatable topic, what we do is we kind of lean on the side of flexibility and discretion. When we're engaging with the practitioners in the business, we just empower and educate them with information on how to best design their process so it aligns with their intended purpose. Clients don't have to use ratings. If they don't choose to use them, they can, and if they do, they can define scales that they would like to use. They can have numeric values, as you were talking about and showing here, or they could have more descriptive rating scales. One of the things I am seeing a lot within the clients as we're working with them and talking with them, I'm seeing the shift away from numeric to more descriptive for those that are using scales. But we ultimately give them discretion, right? They got some good practitioners in the business, and we just educate and share with them, like you are here, the science and some of the research on it, so they can do it responsibly.
So Ruthie asked the question is, how does the elimination of ratings impact employee perceptions on their, I assume you mean their merit increase? It's how it is communicated to an employee about why they're getting whatever kind of increase that they're getting. A lot of companies that have eliminated ratings have chosen to look more at cost of living and then used an actual, change in pay to be based on increased capability or increased scope of their role. So I'm going to move on to our next polling question. And if Erin can launch that, great. So which type of performance ratings best reflect how specific your ratings are? So choose the response that gets at the highest level of specificity you have in your system. So do managers just provide one single overall rating? Do managers provide a rating on goals and a rating on competencies? Do you rate each individual goal and each individual behavior or competency? Or do managers not rate goals or competencies, but are there maybe specific questions? And I'm going to give you an example of this in a minute. Or obviously, those of you who don't rate performance would say we don't rate performance. So we're gonna give you another second here. So what's interesting here is, and I'll comment on this while you're doing your ratings, if you're going to have ratings, we did find that companies with more specific ratings, that is, you're rating each goal and each competency, which actually is your majority response here. And Erin, if you can make sure we share the responses now. Those companies have better outcomes than people who use summary ratings. So I'm really pleased to see in this group, a majority of you are getting down to that level of specification. It's all about getting specific, whether you're having a conversation about it or whether you're using a rating to get there. When you're more specific about, kind of somebody's performance, that conversation facilitates performance better than when we use broad generalities. So in my research, interestingly, more companies provided a single overall rating than this group, which says you are doing that kind of individual rating each goal and each competency, which really is the best practice. So kudos to you. So I'm going to take this down off my screen and move on to our next. So I mentioned one of the options there, which very, very few of you used, was the use of some sort of question other than rating people on goals and behaviors. So some of you may have heard that Deloitte changed their system because they really believe the research that says that you can learn a lot more about the rater from their rating on the employee than you can actually about the employee. So it's all about my idiosyncrasies and my mental state than it is about the employee. So they decided that rather than rate people on competencies and goals, they would try to differentiate performance by these 4 questions. Given what I know about this person's performance, if it were my money, I would give this person the highest possible compensation and compensation increase and bonus. Given what I know about this person's performance, I would always want him or her on my team. This person is at risk for low performance. This person is ready for promotion today. They take this pulse either at the end of every project or at the end of every quarter, whichever is more frequent. And then they average these scores over the 4 quarters or over all the different performance periods to understand kind of that performance snapshot and to use that information in distributing compensation. It's one company's approach, so I'm just sharing it with you. This is really the gold standard for evaluating behaviors, that is having a behaviorally anchored rating scale. So you're really, really specific. Again, we're getting back to that specificity. And this is just an example. You don't have to use these labels. You don't have to have 3 anchors. You could have 5 anchors. You could have 10 anchors if you wanted, although it'd be really hard to differentiate. But the important thing is that you are very, very clear about what are the, in this case, for competencies or behaviors, what are the very specific behaviors that kind of are indicators that somebody is performing at this different level. So this could be anchors for a 1, 3, and a 5. If you had a 5-point rating scale, it could just be 1, 2, and 3. If you had a 3-point rating scale, you could, put something here in between needs improvement and proficient, and between proficient and strength. But being clear and specific about kind of what that performance looks like is what is the gold standard. It's also important when you're rating goals that you have some kind of definition of what those different levels of performance look like. 72% of the participants in our study said that they do use calibration sessions to determine that managers are kind of using the same mental model or schema. And if you're eliminating ratings, you can do the same thing when you're distributing compensation, have the same kind of conversation about, and kind of create an ideal employee profile of what do people look like that are getting kind of different compensation outputs. So that's something that I've seen. Last week, I shared that research from the Neuro Leadership Institute has demonstrated that traditional performance review conversation really creates a threat response in our brain. And our brain literally turns off its creativity center and shuts down to any incoming information when it perceives a threat. Many companies use this research to redesign their rating and review process. And one company that has done so is Eli Lilly and Company. And this is actually data from Eli Lilly and Company that David Rock and his colleagues conducted, where they looked at Eli Lilly. They do a monthly pulse on employee engagement in the company. So they have a pulse score for every single month on employee engagement. And when they looked at this over a couple years worth of data, they found something really, really interesting. For 85% of the employee population, right after the performance review process that happened in February, employee engagement dropped, and it didn't drop a little, it dropped a lot. And it stayed down for 3 to 4 months. That is huge. You see that even for people who were rated a 5, their performance, their engagement dipped a little bit, but it came right back up. But for people who got anywhere between a 2 and a 4, or really a 1 and a 4, their engagement levels dropped significantly. That's a big portion of their population. And Eli Lilly had already established that employee engagement was significantly positively correlated with organizational productivity. So this data scared the bejesus out of management, that they were actually putting the productivity of their organization at risk because employee engagement dropped after the performance review conversation took place. So they actually use this as a data point for getting rid of ratings in their own organization. It's compelling and interesting research, so I wanted to share that with you. I believe that our biggest problem with performance ratings is actually that compensation is driving your performance management bus. Given the small budgets that we have and the fact that our knowledge workers are more intrinsically motivated, not extrinsically motivated with money, our pay for performance programs have actually had very limited impact. Research from Towers Watson, as well as many others, has demonstrated that our pay for performance tools, so merit, bonus increases, they're not really effective at driving improved individual performance, nor are they very effective at rewarding individual performance. And numerous other studies also really point out that pay for performance doesn't motivate performance. And in sometimes it can elicit counterproductive behaviors. So you guys have all read the accounts detailing the scandals and unforeseen consequences of some of these pay for performance programs in companies like Enron or Wells Fargo. Microsoft even found that their competitive ratings were destroying collaboration within the organization, and they replaced their stack ranking process with a process that focuses more on having a growth mindset and teamwork and collaboration. So the question is that everybody asks, how do we motivate, recognize, and reward performance if we don't rely on manager ratings because they're so flawed? So I think we need to transform how we motivate and reward people. We need to motivate without money, particularly because we're dealing a lot with knowledge workers here. People want purpose and meaning in their work. If you can tie the work that they're doing to a larger purpose and meaning, you can really motivate those individuals to work hard, to perform, engage in their work. We shared last week the research around the importance of progress on goals as being a really important factor in motivation. So letting people know the progress that they're making and the impact that their efforts are having, that really motivates performance. A sense of belonging. We all want to belong to a team, right? We all want to belong within our organization. When you build that sense of teamwork, that sense of belonging, we're all in this together, that motivates performance. Giving people autonomy to do the work on their own terms, which I think, our kind of work from home, work remote thing has been really great because managers haven't been there to kind of oversee what employees are doing as much, and employees have had a lot more autonomy, and that is really great. And then the other thing is that we all want mastery. We all want to build our mastery, build our competence. So to the extent that your processes focus on helping people to develop, you will motivate without any money. So that requires us to manage compensation differently. We want to pay our employees fairly relative to the market. We want to grow their pay based on their increase in competence. Link rewards to team and company performance rather than individual performance. You guys know I talked about that last week. Use stock for retention if your company has stock, and other financial rewards. So in our study, companies that recognized and rewarded high performers were significantly more likely to achieve positive outcomes. But recognition and reward does not have to be financial. It doesn't have to mean merit and bonus. In fact, I shared last week that a recognition from your manager, a word, a positive comment is actually more memorable than any amount of money that you're going to pay somebody for achieving something great. Erin, how does Engagedly think about this concept, shifting the way in which we motivate and reward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think motivating employees without money is probably one of the most important things we focus on in Engagedly. When we think of that's really central to the foundation of our platform and our mission. And we think about creating engaging experiences. When we started off, we actually envisioned ourselves as a platform kind of picks up where the engagement survey leaves off. But as our product matured, we recognized that it wasn't about how we manage and drive processes of engaging people, but rather how we help deploy an organization's people strategy. And that people strategy, or that comprehensive people strategy, is really three parts, right? We think about how do we engage the employees, right? How do we execute the strategy? And then ultimately, as you've alluded to here, right, how do we enable our employees to perform and grow and kind of be their best? So when we think about the product, we really focus on creating tools that support each of those three pillars so that clients have the tools for execution, engagement, and enablement.
That's really great. And there are some comments going on in the chat about, there's so much more about our work environment. I think this is really the time for people whose expertise is around the employee experience. There's a whole lot in here. And when we think about motivating and rewarding performance, it's not just about the money. It is about the experience. I want you to consider kind of what's in a name. We talk about performance management. Do knowledge workers today want their performance managed? by anybody. We want this independence. We want to be inspired to do great things. So I encourage you to think about, what does the name of your process kind of tell your employees kind of what you think about how they need to be managed. I love that Gap Inc. has changed the name of their process to Grow, Perform, and Succeed, which says a lot about how they think about their process. It also happens to be their stock ticker. So it's kind of clever, but it really, really talks about what they think about their process. They put grow first because they are all about development, and they know that development will improve organizational performance. So let me share a new model for performance enablement. We typically talk about, performance management as being this annual process, and it has these different steps. And I want you to think about this a little bit differently. And this model and the swirl really comes from, thinking about, you're in a tornado and we're lifting off, right? We're pulling something up. Here in this model, at the very foundation, we have kind of the true north of the company, what you're trying to do, right? What is the mission? What's the vision? What are the goals? Maybe the guidance and the direction also have to do with kind of what are the core behaviors that we expect within the organization, or the expectations and our goals. That really kind of provides our foundation about what we're going to work on. But you have to wrap that up with coaching and feedback, and not just feedback, but feed forward, and to provide all the kind of support that people need. What kind of resources do they need? How do you remove barriers for them? How do you enable them to achieve their most? And enabling them to achieve their most also really includes that development loop, where you're focused on improving their performance. And when you do all of these things in this virtuous cycle, we can increase performance. And the thing that comes out of it is alignment in our organization, increased motivation, progress against goals, and increased capability. So for me, this really speaks to a much more positive, energizing model of performance enablement rather than our old models for performance management. Erin, I'm a little concerned about our time, and I really want to make sure that we have time for questions. So I'm going to skip this discussion. And we can, I want everyone to kind of think about this and maybe you're going to put some questions in the Q&A, but my question was, what do you think of this shift from performance management to performance enablement? And what changes might you make to your process to better make that shift? But I want to talk about sustaining your process over time, and then we're going to be able to kind of quickly wrap up here. But there are two things that I have repeatedly found through several research studies about what is the most important factor in determining whether or not you'll have success with your process. And the first is leadership support. And this isn't like, yeah, our leadership supports us doing this process. It means that your leaders are talking about the importance of it. They're talking about the different elements of performance management or performance enablement, and they are role modeling the behaviors that you talk about. The second factor that is the most critical thing to whether or not you achieve your goals with performance enablement is management capability. Whether or not managers have the skills to coach and develop and support their employees to higher levels of performance is the most critical determining factor about whether or not you will be successful. You guys, these are implementation issues. These are not design issues. So make sure that you spend as much time on implementing your process and getting these change management elements right than you do on you spend the time on design of your process. So you obviously need to measure what you're doing in order to improve your process over time. And I'm going to share with you just a variety of things, of ways companies measure their process to sustain it over time. Compliance metrics. I'm not a big fan of compliance metrics. They tell you that what people are doing, but not how well they're doing them. So whether or not people have set their goals on time or had performance conversations. Great to know, but it doesn't tell you the quality of that. Usage is interesting. If you are using recognition or crowdsourced feedback, really interesting to know how well used those products, how engaged are people in the, kind of all together working together to improve performance of the organization. That's interesting. Actual versus expected distributions, we see this a lot, particularly for companies that are trying to manage to a distribution. Again, I'm not a big fan of that, but a lot of companies do it. Another way of looking at those distributions is, are people's rewards distributed based on very similar, good correlation with their actual ratings? So you want to make sure that there's alignment there. There's a lot of kind of spot checking of performance reviews to make sure that people are getting quality information. That's great. I find employee surveys to be one of the best ways of getting at whether or not you're really achieving your intended goals with performance management. Do people feel like they're getting meaningful feedback from their manager? Do people feel like their goals are well aligned in the organization? Really understanding from their perspective, I think, is really, really important. And then holding managers accountable. We found in our study, those companies that actually hold managers accountable for engaging in the process, that is, their pay was tied to how well they executed on performance management, whether it be because there was a rating on some sort of manager competency, or whether it was directly tied to how well they executed on the process or their ratings from an employee engagement perspective, that those companies tend to outperform companies that don't really hold managers accountable. So what can technology do for your process? A lot of people think that, we're just automating a paper and pencil kind of version, right? And yes, you can now see, what percentage of people have actually completed their process, and that's really helpful. But technology can do so much more than simply automating your existing process. It can allow you to quickly update goals so that employees are focused on the most pressing business priority. It helps people visually see how they connect to higher level goals within the organization. It can enable real-time feedback from anyone, anywhere. It can facilitate your weekly check-ins or monthly check-ins and keep track of performance against goals. It can help tie recognition and rewards to performance, and it can connect to learning opportunities that are based on people's development needs. And this is one of the reasons that I'm actually a big fan of the Engageably platform, is because they tie all those elements together when they talk about managing performance. It's holistic. It's not, I have an LMS, I have a recognition system, I have a performance management system. They address all of that within one platform. And to me, that's really beneficial. The newest advancements in technology provide nudges to remind managers to check in with their employees or when to provide feedback. And for some roles like sales or customer service or truck driving, technology now can let us track performance in real time. So we can actually get away from some of those manager ratings and have real accurate ratings based on performance. So that's really fantastic. So this is just a brief summary of what we've talked about today. I'm not going to spend time going through it. You'll get it in your summary slide deck. What I'd like to do is open it up to questions or comments. Aaron, do you want to?
Yeah, so we actually had a question come in. So Karen was asking, can you speak to the models for what pay increases are based on, if not performance?
Well, I'm not saying that they're not based on performance. I'm just saying that we don't need to label people and give them a rating. So most companies, it's always about performance, right? So you're going to, I'm just saying not tying, hardwiring pay and performance together. But of course, when we're determining the value of a person's contributions. Laszlo Bock, who was the former SVP of HR for Google, he talked about the concept in his book, Work Rules, to pay people unfairly. Pay people based on their contributions to your organization. And don't worry that, you have to pay everybody in the same job, the same amount. If they're actually contributing in a different way, if they're adding value in a different way, you want to make sure that you're really recognizing and rewarding those employees for the value that you bring to the company. So focusing on the impact that people are having with the work that they're doing, and making that the determining factor, it's still based on goal achievement, et cetera. But what we're saying is you just don't have to put a label on it. But to say that we wouldn't take, kind of what you achieve into account when determining your pay, that's ludicrous. The people who have eliminated ratings have eliminated the need to label people, but they still talk about performance. What's next?
So you might have answered Melissa's question as well when you're talking about that, but I'll re-ask this and get your insights on this. So Melissa had mentioned she's on a board and they're not using performance ratings for merit increases, but what do you do? What do you use then to increase employee comp over time, outside of that living cost?
Yeah. So a lot of my clients that have eliminated ratings have done several different things. So one is obviously what I just talked about. Like if their performance really indicates some great bonuses due, then that's fabulous. But when it comes to base pay, merit is a misnomer because we call it merit pay. But as I said, it's not just based on performance. That's the implication. It's just performance. But merit pay is also based on where you are in your pay range, right? Are you of low proficiency, moderate proficiency, or high proficiency within your role? Those types of things make a difference in how we're compensating people. So calling it merit, there's a little bit of an issue because there are a lot of issues that get muddled up in how we determine compensation. And those issues should get muddled up in how we determine compensation, but referring to it as merit, let's just call it base pay. This is like how we're determining your base pay. So we are determining it based on your relative proficiency in your role. We might be giving you a cost of living increase because kind of where your pay band is would gradually increase over time. It might change based on the scope in your role. So looking at those other factors that would influence a base pay increase is where I see a lot of companies that have eliminated ratings, how they focus on that element. And then bonus is strictly tied to achievement of particular deliverables.
That was great. And Melissa, thanks you. You answered her question.
Great.
So I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I have a question for you. So you introduced Enablement to us today, this new model. Mm-hmm. What do you recommend as kind of the next step for us who have been attending these sessions and kind of are interested in moving forward with that enablement model or adopting it, or what would you recommend as kind of the next step for them?
Yeah. We began this session talking about what is the purpose of your performance management process. And I think, as I said, unfortunately, I think compensation's kind of hijacked performance management, right? It's really all about distributing compensation. It's not about managing performance. And if we take the idea that our goal with performance management is improving individual and organizational performance, and that's really what we want to drive to, you can see how I've kind of woven a thread through the 3 masterclass series that we've had that leads you more to performance enablement and providing all that support. I mean, we need to set goals because goals are motivating, but we need to wrap around that the support that people need. And rather than giving people feedback, which is kind of looking in the rearview mirror and not very helpful, the idea of feeding forward, that is, taking the context of what's happened in the past, but having a conversation about what will happen differently in the future is really what enables somebody to improve their performance as they move forward. And so I believe kind of this more coaching and development focus also really helps with that employee experience. I mean, we're going through the Great Resignation right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And employee experience is more important than ever before. One gentleman who I believe was in the UK was talking about, you know, the workplace atmosphere that that organizations are facing, and that is driving a lot of behavior to leave or to be disgruntled about what kind of pay you have. And if we take this more holistic look around enabling people, helping people to be more successful, employees are going to be happier about what this performance enablement process is. It will drive employee engagement within your organization, and that's going to fuel performance. You cannot leave out development. That is so important in retaining talent and improving performance in the organization. Mm-hmm. So I think when we look at this with that different lens, I think we build a very different performance solution than we have designed in our organizations today.
Yeah, well said, Edie. You know, and I think from a systems standpoint, your systems has to support your approach. So very well said. Edie, thank you so much for bringing your insights and your expertise into all of these sessions. It's been a pleasure to work with you. Thank you to the audience for your time and willingness to learn and problem solve with us today and throughout all of our sessions. So as a reminder, we'll be sending you all exclusive access to our unreleased research study over the next week or so and a complimentary demo consultation. Thanks again. Appreciate it, and keep creating engaging experiences. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.